Hey folks, Russell Conti here with the Soapbox. Recently I was invited by Nancy's Notions to create a new pattern and project for one of their amazing templates. This one's their Sewing with Nancy So Simple Dresden Template. I thought, well hey, I'm up for the challenge. So not only did I come up with one project, I came up with 4 different projects using it. This is the first of 4 projects, and this particular project is a gardener's apron. It's got Flowerpot Pockets at the bottom, they're kind of cool. There's a stem coming out of one of them and there's a big sunflower at the very top of it. And we use this Dresden template for the petals on the sunflower. Now, of course, you're going to need some sewing supplies. You're going to need your fabrics, you're going to need the pattern, of course, and you're going to need the printed instructions. They'll be helpful. But if you've got the video, you should be in good shape as well. After that, you're going to definitely need the Sewing with Nancy So Simple Dresden template. It comes like this, and then it also comes with template instructions. Of course, you'll want your rotary cutter, ruler, and a mat. If you don't have one, your standard shears will work. Some thread trimming scissors. I also use this for clipping corners on some of the pieces, and so you'll want something a bit more chunky than thread nips. A seam ripper, certainly for taking out mistakes, but there's also a point when we're working on a Bargello part of the project where we'll actually need the seam ripper to remove some stitches that we did. I love my clover flower head pins. They work really well, and so you'll want some pins. You'll also want some Roxanne's glue basted. This is an amazing product. I use it all the time, whether it be home deck, quilting, or garment construction. It's a temporary adhesive that I can heat set with the iron and then it washes away. It's brilliant. What I really like is this particular container it's in. They call it the Easy Squeezy bottle. The reason I like it is because some of them tend to glob up. This needle point is very fine. And this one, by the virtue of that little pump action, it sucks all the glue back out and then it doesn't tend to get as clogged. So I really appreciate that. Finally, you have a couple more things. We have a bias tape maker made by Clover. This is an 18mm or roughly 3/4 of an inch. We use this to create the stem. That's an optional piece, but it makes your life a little bit easier. And the stiletto, also optional, but I find I use it all the time for help following fabric through on my sewing machine, and it also helps when we're trying to push fabric through on our bias tape maker. And that covers the basics on it. Without further ado, let's get right to it. So the first thing, we're going to cut out our apron, then we're going to finish all the edges. I've overlocked mine. You're seeing half of it right here. You can use pinking or you can zigzag that edge too. The overlock is a really nice professional finish. Once we're done there, we're going to go ahead and mark our seam allowances at where the arm, edge of the arm and the side seam come together. 1/2 inch here, 1/2 inch here. I used a friction pen for that. With the heat of the iron, these marks go away, so it's pretty magical. We're going to come here, 1/2 inch, just for a little portion. We can come all the way across the bottom, that's 1 inch. And then here at the top, we have a 1/2 inch seam allowance here. It's going to jut back out. This is going to fold back on itself eventually. And then we have a 2 inch seam allowance at the top here. So what we want to do is fold these back on the line and then just hold them in place. So that one's get folded down. This one is going to need to get folded down as well. That's the side seam where it meets the arm. The bottom is going to fold up on the seam allowance. We'll do the same thing for the other side. Fold it up at the bottom. Fold down at the arm where it matches the side seam. And then at the top again, we're going to fold this back 2 inches. And we're going to take it to the sewing machine and we're going to sew our seam allowances here. We're going to sew 1/2 inch on this line here. We're going to sew 1/2 inch here just to anchor that. We're going to sew up 1 inch here at the seam allowance, also 1/2 inch. And the same thing on the other side. So now that we've sewn the seams back on themselves, at the top, the side, and the bottom, we're going to go ahead and trim some of this excess away. Just going to trim it down to about half the distance, about 1/4 inch right there, and then clip that out. It's just going to reduce some of the bulk. Side seam the same thing. And at the hem, same exact thing. Once we've done that, we're ready to turn it to the face side. Just like that. And there. There. And there. Now once I get them turned to the right side, I want them clean, so I'm going to take my little stiletto, I'm just going to tease it out a bit. So now that we have these all turned, we're ready to turn our seam allowances. Our seam allowance on the side is 1/2 inch. So here, and we'll press it in place. Our seam allowance is on the arm, and it's on bias, so it feels like it's going to be a little awkward, but actually it'll press right into place, 1/2 inch, 2 inches at the top. Again, 1/2 inch on the side, 1/2 inch on the arm, 1/2 inch on the side, 1 inch at the bottom. Okay, so now that we're pinned, we've got everything pressed, we're ready to sew. Many people will just simply sew it from the back side, and that's quite fine. However, every once in a while what you'll find is that you'll start pushing seam allowances. So if you're using a walking foot, that's okay. But I like to sew from the face side, or the right side of the fabric. The reason that is because the less stable piece of fabric, if it's on the bottom, the feed dogs help pull it through and ease it into place. And so it'll be more successful if we sew it from the face side. Okay, so I'm going to sew all my seam allowances. My seam allowances are 1/2 inch, so I'll probably sew about 3/8 inch away from the edge, about 1 inch and 7/8 from this edge, because that's 2 inches, and about 7/8 inch away from the bottom edge as well. Now that we've completed the apron front, we're going to go ahead and start on our Dresden Sunflower. First things first, we're going to need our So Simple Dresden Template from Nancy's Notions. It's an amazing little tool. We're going to cut 4-inch strips, cross grain. Once we've done that, we're going to go ahead and start using the template to create our design here. I'm going to place it here on the edge, and use my rotary cutter, I'm going to cut right there and right there. Once I've got that cut, I'm simply going to turn it and continue my cut over here. You're going to need 20 petals to create each sunflower. Okay. Once we've done that, I wanted the edge of my sunflower shaped. So we use the top of the template right here, and there's a portion where the center of the mark is right there, and then there's marks for A. We're going to follow the A line, and we're just going to go ahead and cut that curvature at the top for each petal. Finally, we want to have that upper edge finished when we're sewing. So what we do is take a piece of muslin, I did, and place it on the wrong side, and we're simply going to sew across the top, 1/4 inch away from the edge, and then we're going to turn that to the other edge so we have a clean finish on that side. Now that we've sewn it 1/4 inch away from the edge, we're going to go ahead and trim it away, the excess right here. And I trim it down pretty substantially. I'd go down to a little more than 1/8 inch. I can do that safely because my stitch length I've been using is about 1.8. So a very short stitch length. And the shorter we cut this, the more rounded an edge we're going to get here at the top when we press. Now when you get ready to press it, take it to the ironing board and favor it to the inside so that the muslin is on this side. You can see a bit of the top peeking through from the front. We don't want to see the muslin on the front, so we want to roll it to the back just a little bit. Once you've done that and pressed it, you're going to have to trim this excess off. And this is what we're left with right there. A little patch of muslin on the back to give us that nice clean edge on the top, and then there. We're going to do that 20 times, and then we're going to go ahead and start sewing them together. First we'll sew them into pairs. And again, we'll be using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I like to start a little forward of the petal edge, and then I back up to it, catch it right at the edge, and then come forward. That keeps that more stable right there. I'm going to go and sew down this side, and then I'm going to open it up and press my seam allowances open. I'm going to create little arcs. So I'm going to do 2 petals, then 4 petals, and then finally a 5th. I'm going to create a quarter arc, do another quarter arc, sew that together, and then I'll sew the balance together so I get my sunflower all stitched. So for the sunflower center, you can simply opt for a circular piece of fabric that you attach to a piece of muslin, sew it all the way around, we turn it to the wrong side, we make a slit in the back and flip it right side out, and then again favor it so that the muslin is hiding to the back. Now when you're doing this, it's much easier to leave the muslin in a square shape or a little bit larger than the circle. It's really difficult to sew 2 circles together successfully. So if you leave it flat like this, you can sew all the way around it, then cut the excess away. Flip it to the back, split that open, and turn it to the right side. I've opted for a Bargello effect on my sunflower center that's going to end up looking like that. So for my Bargello effect, I have 6 strips of fabric, 1.5 inches wide, and for this particular process, about 12 to 14 inches of length is plenty. Sew them together at 1/4 inch seam allowances. I like to press everything in one direction. If you do that, however, when you get ready to do your Bargello, you'll have to take every alternate strip and repress the seam allowance in the opposite direction. Some people like to press their seam allowances open, and that's quite fine as well. I just find that they nest a little bit more successfully, and these seam allowances are more successful. The intersections are better when I do it that way. Personal preference, not a right or wrong. Once you've sewn them all together and pressed them, you're then going to sew it into a tube, right? So in this one, I've already done that. So it's all flat, and then I just took these 2 ends together and sewed them into a tube. Then what I do is I come back through and I subcut the pieces I need. I'm going to need 6 pieces, 1.5 inches wide. Now that I've subcut them into the pieces I need now to open them up so I get my Bargello. The first one I'm going to open at the top. And that's going to reveal that portion. The next one I'm going to step 1 down and open that one. Gives me that one. Now that I've stepped 1 down, I'm going to step another 1 down. I'm going to come down and open this one. It's going to go in that direction. You can start to see how the stair-step effect is occurring. Now we've opened the top one, that one, and that one. We're going to come to this one and open here now. Okay, so we've opened this one, this one, this one, and this one. Okay, now we're ready to open this one. Just keep stepping down a color each time to open the seam allowance. And finally, this one, this one, this one, this one. We've done this one, now we're ready to do this one. And there's our Bargello effect right there. Right. Now, as I indicated, since my seam allowances are pressed in one direction, I'm going to have to come back through and press every alternate row in the opposite direction. Not a big deal. Okay, so this one I'll press down, this one I'll press down, this one I'll press down. I'll sew those into pairs, and then I'll sew that triplet into one full set, and we'll end up with a piece that looks like this. Now that I've completed my Bargello center, I'm going to go ahead and cut it to size, following my circle template. take a piece of muslin that's larger, squared, lay that faces down, and I'm going to go ahead and sew all the way around the perimeter, split the muslin open, and then turn it to the right side. So once we've sewn it around, we're going to go ahead and trim close to the edge, and you can do that with a regular pair of shears. I did it with pinking shears. The reason I used pinking shears is on a curve, it helps so that the edges are more rounded. So once we've done that, we're going to go ahead and split this open, and we're going to turn it to the right side, and we'll give it a nice press. Again, we want to favor it toward the muslin side, so when we're pressing, we want to keep the muslin hidden. Now that we've finished our sunflower center, we're ready to adhere it to the center of our sunflower. We're going to do that with the Roxanne's glue based. And what I'm doing is just running a bead of glue real close to the edge on the muslin side. This is a water-based glue that will wash out later on so it doesn't leave any residue. And then I can heat set it with the iron so it'll hold things in place temporarily while I get ready to sew it. Makes for quick work. We just want to place this how we want it centered to the flower. And a little bit of heat with the iron, and we're ready to applique it. Now the applique technique I typically use is just a straight stitch close to the edge, and that's what I'm going to use. You can use any style you like, a blanket stitch, Madeira applique, by machine, by hand, whatever makes you happy. So once I determine where I want the sunflower to be placed, I go ahead and mark up into it about 1 inch. I need to create a stem for the sunflower, and I want it to be covered by that, so that's what that mark is there for. So I need to create my stem, and I'm going to use a piece of fabric. I'm going to use one of Clover's bias tape makers to create it, but I'm not going to actually cut my fabric on bias. You can if you like, but it's unnecessary. In this case, I'm using an 18mm wide one, so I need twice the width, which is roughly 1.5 inches. We place it in there. We're going to take our stiletto to help it follow through, and then we grab that, and then with the heat of the iron, we place the iron here, and see how it just automatically folds into place for us? And we can use that to create our stem. So I'm going to get this pressed real quickly, and then I'll show you how we place it. Now that I've created my stem, I'm going to go ahead and apply it the same way I did the center of the sunflower. I'm going to go ahead and place a bead of Roxanne's glue paste real close to the edge. I'm going to then place it on the apron where I want it to be, and then I'm going to heat set it with the iron to temporarily sew it. So we're placing it close to the edge here. Again, this is Roxanne's glue based. It's a temporary adhesive that holds things in place. I'll place it, and then I'm going to set it with the heat of the iron to hold it more quickly. And then I'm going to applique the edges. I've cut the top and the bottom on a bias. That way they won't fray over time, and I don't have to finish them in any other fashion. The top portion will be covered by the sunflower. The bottom portion will eventually be covered by the pocket. What I want to do is get my placement. Here's my line that I've created for it. I want to make certain it runs up into the sunflower and down into the pocket on that center line. And then again, we'll set it with the heat of the iron, and then we'll applique this edge and this edge. So we're going to do the same thing to this Dresden Sunflower that we did to the center of the sunflower, where we glued the edges, and to the stem. We're going to use the Roxanne's glue base really close to the edge. And this will allow us to turn it over and then heat set it for a temporary hold while we applique it finally in place. You don't need too much of the glue. And it gets, again, it's water based, so it will wash out. Now we have each petal glued. We'll turn it over to set it in place. bit of a pat. And then I'm going to go ahead and set it with the iron, and then I'm going to applique stitch around the outside edge. Now that we have sewn our sunflower to the apron, we're ready for the Flowerpot Pockets. For our Flowerpot Pockets, we're going to need two background pieces. We're going to need the flower pot itself, and then we're going to need the rim of the flower pot here at the top. Okay. First step is simply to take the backgrounds and sew them at 1/4 inch on either side. Once we've done that, we're going to press those seam allowances open. So here it is sewn, and then we want to take these seam allowances and press them open to reduce bulk. Once you've done that, you're going to take the rim of the flower pot, you're going to sew it to the top, right like that. The cool thing about this is once you're done there, you're going to take the bottom and you're going to roll it up. Do this in garment sewing all the time. So if you're used to sewing a yoke into a shirt, this is the same technique. We're going to fold this back on itself. Once we do that, we're going to turn it to the other side and we're going to fold it over one more time. The entire pocket will be inside, and then we're going to sew on top of the other stitching, right across there. We're going to seal it up. Once we've sealed it up, we'll then go ahead and pull the interior right side out. It's going to feel a little awkward, but just keep tugging on it. And that way we have enclosed the upper edge all at once. So here's the back side. Okay, there's the top of the rim of the pot, and here's the front side. All seam allowances encased inside. Once we're done with that, we're going to go ahead and sew the pockets end to end. There's going to be 3 pieces. And you're going to sew them at a 1/2 inch seam allowance and press that seam allowance open. Okay, here's the back. You're going to take the top edge here, and I'm going to fold those edges under just a little bit to reduce the bulk right there in the corner and to keep that raw edge from peeking through the top. Seam allowances are 1/2 inch, then I'm going to take the side and I'm going to fold it in 1/2 inch and turn down that seam allowance as well at the top edge. Cool. Now the thing that's a little odd is when you look at this, it's going to have a bit of an arc to it, so don't be surprised by that. When we're finished with it, it will be flat, okay? And the point of this is simply to create sort of a bellows pocket. We want to make certain that we take this and we take that up to straight up and down. This is perpendicular to the edge. That'll be straight up and down, and then that'll leave a little bit of space in the pocket there. And then when we attach this to the side, that'll be straight up and down, leaving a little bit of space in the ends of the pockets. Now that we've assembled the pocket, we're ready to attach it to the apron at the bottom. Kind of a unique take on this. What we're going to do is we're going to take the raw edge and we're going to place it right on the seam allowance at the bottom. Now what's important is right now, these ends have to be shallow of the sides, so we don't want them to match up identically at the sides. We want them to be inside ever so slightly. Okay? If they aren't, then go ahead and press them in a little bit deeper so that they are. Mine are quite fine. And what I want to do is, starting from center, is pin so that the raw edge of the fabric is right on this sewing line. Now remember, this is a bit of an arc, so don't be surprised by that. Go ahead and straighten it out so it matches on the line nicely here. Get that side, get that side. Again, matching on the seam allowance line. And then what we're going to do is we're going to sew at a 1/4 inch away from the edge, all the way along here. Then we'll eventually fold it up into place and then top stitch it into place. Okay, so we've sewn the Flowerpot pockets face down to the face side of the apron, right at the hem, and we aligned the raw edge of the pockets with the sewing line of the hem. And we sewed a 1/4 inch from edge to edge, making sure these ends are folded in and ever so slightly shorter than the edges of the apron. Once that part is completed, oh, and one more note, make certain that your stem finishes before the bottom of the pot, otherwise it'll stick out. We're going to fold that up and into place. We'll give this a nice press, and then again, by virtue of that bellows that's going to occur, we're going to have a little bit of fullness here, right? So we want to just bring this in so this edge matches up. We want to make certain this is perpendicular to the edge, this one's perpendicular to the edge, and that'll leave a little bit of opening on those pockets at the very top. But we'll press this Then what we're going to do is we're going to stitch from here, come across the bottom, come up about 1/8 of an inch from the edge, maybe 1/4 inch is fine as well. Come across the top, come back down, across the bottom, up the side of the pocket, across to the other side of the pocket, come down, and then up here and back stitch, and your pockets are attached. So finally we're ready for our apron strings. I've got a 3-inch piece of fabric, and I folded the raw edges towards center. And I'm simply going to fold those over, and I'm going to top stitch close to this edge. Now the trick here is when you're doing this, make certain you can see the back ever so slightly. That way when you're sewing through the front, you know you're capturing the back. Otherwise, if you can't see it, it's likely you're not sewing at the same time. So I sewed this close to the edge, and I sewed this close to the edge. Okay, so it's time to get our apron strings attached and our hardware. So what we're going to do is we're simply going to take our apron string, which is about 50 inches long in my case. Too long is not a problem. You can always cut them to length. And I don't bother finishing in. I just cut it on the bias, and that way it doesn't fray over time. But what I want to do is right here at the seam allowance at the top, remember we had the fold back of 2 inches, about 1/4 inch away from the cut edge, on the sewing line, the seam allowance that we had before, I'm going to sew right there just to anchor that in place. What I'm going to do then is fold this back, and then I'm going to go ahead and top stitch all the way around this perimeter, just like I've done here. Okay. Same thing for the side. What I'm going to do is, laying it face on the fabric, about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam allowance on the side seam, I'm going to go ahead and stitch it there just to hold it in place temporarily. Then I'm going to go ahead and put these 2 D rings on, and these are rectangular in shape. If you can't get the rectangular ones, the D rings will work. And these are 3/4 inch, and I'm going to fold this back about 1/4 of an inch, maybe 3/8. That's going to fold back like this, so that these 2 raw edges match up underneath. I want to reduce the bulk, but I want to make certain those edges are covered. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stitch all the way around the perimeter from the edge, down the side, down that side, and back up, just to anchor that. Okay, then that one's in place, just like we did over here. Okay, there's a little box stitch right there, and then all the raw edges are covered underneath there. So now that our apron is complete, what we need to do is go ahead and buckle up the straps. And this is built across on the back. So we're going to come here through those 2 loops, and the 2 D rings will act as a little gauge. They'll keep everything stabilized and snug. See, right there. And that'll cross, and the other one will cross this direction. Slip right back through, and you are all good to go. You're going to place it on over your head, right like that, arms through each side, and that way you have no big straps right around your neck. It'll actually come and rest right in the middle of your back.